we are beginning with the fourth tablet in the book. These are, this is now new territory, newly translated material, not previously available in English, although I think most of these have been available in the original languages, Persian and Arabic. They add flavor and context and I think a three-dimensionality to the concept of spiritual journey. And what we'll be doing is reading through them and seeing if we can map the ideas in these tablets onto the stages that we've already discussed. Thinking of the seven valleys maybe as the backbone of our thinking about spiritual journey, but realizing that even the seven valleys don't encompass the totality of it. We were talking last session about a tablet that seems to go beyond the seven valleys. You know, there is something beyond fana. There is something beyond annihilation, which is another stage that isn't explicitly given a valley in the seven valleys. And then there's even a stage beyond that, which is mentioned in Gems of Divine Mysteries, but not mentioned in the seven valleys. But it was mentioned in the shorter tablet that we looked at last week. And I think we'll find an allusion to that further stage also in one of the tablets that we'll hopefully get to today. But let's first of all read through tablet number 4. And this is just a short, delightful sketch of almost the seven valleys in miniature. It doesn't have a formal name, although it could be called the Tablet of the Seven Steps, because Baha'u'llah, addressing the recipient of the tablet, tells him to set out from his abode and take 7 steps upon the earth, and with each step complete a stage of the journey. That reminds us of the seven valleys. Towards the end of the seven valleys, Baha'u'llah also says about the journey. He says, this is in paragraph 87 of the seven valleys, Baha'u'llah says, these journeys have no visible ending in this temporal world, but the detached wayfarer, should invisible confirmation descend upon him, and the guardian of the cause assist him, may traverse these 7 stages in 7 steps, nay, rather in 7 breaths, nay, even in a single breath, should God will and desire it. So we're looking at the 7-step version of the seven valleys in the short tablet. It's in Arabic, and I think from the context, it seems as though the recipient was blind. Was blind, because he refers at the end. He says, place this tablet. He says, or place this robe upon thy sightless eyes, that thine eye of thine inmost heart may be opened. Not either literally he was blind, or this is a metaphorical spiritual blindness. I suppose we can't be sure. It begins, in the name of our Lord, the exalted, the Most High. O friend, many a day hath passed, and still the sweet fragrance of thy faithfulness hath failed to reach us. Hast thou forgotten the one who forgetteth thee not, and forsaketh thee not, and neglecteth thee not, even as thou hast forgotten, and neglected him? We have heard that sorrows have compassed thee round in these days. Thy sorrow hath grieved us, and that which hath befallen thee hath touched us with bitter pain and anguish. But at this moment, O friend, the herald of eternity announceth unto thee, by the robe of faithfulness, his joyful tidings, and bestoweth upon thee this emerald green tablet. Set out then from thine abode, take thou 7 steps upon the earth, and with each step complete a stage of the journey. With the first, enter the ocean of search, and seek God thy Lord with thine inmost heart and soul. With the second, enter the ocean of love, and make mention of God thy Lord in the transports of thy longing and the ecstasies of thy rapture. With the third, tread the paths of detachment, that is, sever thyself from thine idle fancies, and walk in the ways of thy Lord. With the fourth, enter the fathomless depths of oneness and the billowing seas of eternity. Cover thy face in the dust before the Lord of Lords, and sanctify thyself in thy spirit from all departure and return, that thine inmost heart may be freed from all things in the kingdoms of creation. With the fifth, ascend unto the heaven of wonderment, that thou mayest taste the goodly fruits of this blessed realm. Lose thyself in bewilderment before the power of thy beloved and the dominion of thy Creator, and proclaim that which the King of existence and the goal of all desire hath proclaimed. Increase my wonder and amazement at thee, O God. With the sixth, soar upon the wings of submission and contentment unto the cities of the unseen, that thou mayest enter the expanses of utter nothingness, wherein thou shalt die to thyself and live in him who hath fashioned thee. With the seventh, drown thyself in the depths of eternity, that death may not overtake thee, and that thou mayest abide forever in the shadow of the everlasting face of God. Thereupon shall the fragrance of the All-Glorious be diffused from the realm of the All-Merciful, and thy heart shall grieve no more over the vicissitudes of a fleeting life and the turns of a transient fortune. When once thou hast privily completed these journeys, place this robe upon thy sightless eyes, that the eye of thine inmost heart may be opened. By God, O my friend, wert thou to attain unto this station, thou wouldst find wondrous worlds, discover heavenly bowers, celestial gardens, and transcendent realms, and unravel the secrets of the progress of the souls of men through the atmosphere of eternal holiness and the heavens of imperishable glory. Thou wouldst so rejoice within thy soul as to cause the signs of joy and gladness to appear throughout the whole earth. Thereafter sorrow would never again hold sway over thee, nor wouldst grief ever seize thee in its grasp, for thou wouldst abide in the heaven of holiness amidst the concourse of the blissful. Know thou, moreover, that in the sight of God thou holdest a lofty rank and an exalted station. Remove not thyself from the company of his servants. Rather do thou gather them together in the cause of God, and admonish them in his days. Rely upon God in all thine affairs. He verily shall suffice thee in all things, shall protect thee from the followers of the evil one, and shall cause thee to enter the everlasting paradise, wherein thou shalt be numbered with the blessed. Convey then our greetings unto those who follow thee in the cause of thy Lord, and summon them unto the straight path. Such a beautiful summary. We don't know who it's to, and we don't know the relative timing for all of these tablets. None of them are dated, so we don't know. I'm not sure how much it would even help us to know were they written before or after the seven valleys or the four valleys. They all, in any case, form, I think, a pretty seamless whole. One interesting thing about this list of stages is that it differs slightly from the seven valleys, and the fact that when in these various tablets where Baha'u'llah talks about spiritual journey, there's slight variations in how he describes it, I think itself is a really important bit of information. That Baha'u'llah himself did not think of this in absolutely crystallized fashion. That this is the way it is for everyone at all times, and the fact that there's variations, and depending on who he's speaking to, he can vary it slightly. So for example, in between paragraphs 5 and 6, he switches the oneness, or he adds a valley or a stage, which is detachment, which is not explicitly there in the seven valleys. Although likewise in Attar's version of Conference of the Birds, the valley of detachment precedes the valley of unity, and so in a way this follows a bit more of that template. Although the word is slightly different. The word for detachment here, although in Attar it's actually the same word for contentment, and we talked about that a few sessions ago. Here it's actually it's a different word. It's inqita, as opposed to istighna, and which literally more means detachment, whereas the detachment in Attar is a little bit more like the contentment in the seven valleys. And also in paragraph 6, where he refers to the depths of oneness, it's not tawhid here, it's fardaniye, which is more like singleness than oneness, but very, very similar concept. But the point is that there's slight variations. In paragraph 8, the cities of the unseen, Madinat al-Amma, or Madinat al-Amma. The word Amma is what we've talked about in past sessions as well. This the first poem that Baha'u'llah revealed, this reference to this completely unknown and unreachable and indescribable divinity. And the expanses of utter nothingness here are, of course, the fana that we're familiar with. In paragraph 10, where he says, "Place this robe upon thy sightless eyes," at the very beginning, in paragraph 2, the tablet, I suppose, metaphorically is the robe. And the idea of placing a robe upon one's sightless eyes, does anybody know where that comes from? It's an allusion to the story of Joseph. Not the version actually that's in the Bible, but the Quranic version of the story of Joseph in Surah 12 of the Quran. At the end, when the brothers come back from Egypt, announcing to the old, now very aged Jacob, the father of Joseph, when they announce to Jacob that Joseph is alive, and they invite him back to Egypt, and that begins the migration of the Jewish people into Egypt. The proof that Joseph is alive was the shirt, or sometimes translated as robe, which in the Quran is placed upon Jacob's eyes because his sight had become dim at that point. And when they put the robe on his eyes, he regained his sight.
The fragrance.
And the fragrance of the robe is the other thing.
And it's,
so
it's a real fragrance.
Is there?
Say more about that.
Well, other things that I have read and heard is that the robe of Baha'u'llah had a wonderful fragrance. And I have heard people say, I was seeking the fragrance of Baha'u'llah and actually smelling it. And once I did. I thought, at least it was after a death of some dear baha'i, and we were looking at actually a stale, musty smelling photo album, and then this wonderful fragrance.
Yeah.
I think fragrance is real.
Yeah.
Measles have a smell. Well, this is true. I mean, diseases have a smell.
Yeah.
And
That's how
cleanliness has
dogs
a
can
smell.
smell disease on
Yeah, Baha'u'llah refers to this fragrance of the garment. That phrase appears very often in Baha'u'llah's writings, and every time it's a reference to this story of Joseph.
And it's a very deep connection. I mean, when the sense of smell is very different than any other sense.
Yes,
Where
it links to deep memories.
It links directly back
Oh,
to
yeah.
the brain and emotions. It connects
Yes.
directly back, both to nostalgia and emotions and so on. So the idea of fragrance is very different than just touching something, for example.
Is it any reference to him being in the rose garden at all?
I don't think it's. I don't think in this particular case it's the idea is more the fragrance of roses, but more the story of Joseph, which is pervasive throughout both Baha'u'llah's and Abdu'l-Baha's writings. The first book of the Babs was his commentary on the Surah of Joseph. Baha'u'llah also writes about himself as the divine Joseph. Both Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, I think, resonated deeply with the story of Joseph, who was abandoned in the well by his brothers, and is, all sorts of symbolism there, and is sort of brought out of the well and brought into Egypt. It's like the hero's journey, the very classic, story, sort of movement of the story.
It's a richer story of Joseph in the Quran.
Oh yeah.
Than in the Bible.
Yes, I mean each of them has the biblical version and the Quranic version each have details that the other lacks. So it's very interesting to see them against each other. Yeah.
I'm wondering what the smell was like. Is it like roses or?
I don't know. It was just heaven.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if there was any linguistic connection in the original text between that when he's talking about the sightless eyes and referencing back in the cities of the unseen. Is there any tie to that? Is that sort of spiritual blindness?
It's possible because he might have referenced this because his recipient was blind, and the word for ama is from the same root as blindness. At the same time, the phrase occurs quite often at this stage already, in other contexts, and so it might be a coincidence. Hard to say. Yeah.
That's
Yeah, the cities of the unseen is I think it's been translated elsewhere as unknowing. It's the there's a short tablet of Abdul Baha where he explains what is meant by Amma, and it may be in the notes here. It's on page 105. He says, Amma is defined as an extremely thin and subtle cloud, seen and then not seen. For shouldst thou gaze with the utmost care, thou wouldst discern something. But as soon as thou dost look again, it ceaseth to be seen. For this reason, in the usage of mystics who seek after truth, Amma signifieth the universal reality without individuations as such. For these individuations exist in the mode of uncompounded simplicity and oneness, and are not differentiated from the divine essence. Thus they are individuated and not individuated. This is the station alluded to by the terms ahadiyeh, absolute oneness, and amma. This is the station of the hidden treasure mentioned in the hadith. The divine attributes, therefore, are individuations that exist in the essence but are not differentiated therefrom. They are seen and then not seen. This, in brief, is what is meant by amma. There's a whole lot to unpack from there.
Sounds like physics.
Yeah, kind of like
Yeah, seen and then not seen. Yes. Schrodinger's cat. But yeah, it starts off as it's a kind of a cloud. You've all seen these clouds in the sky that you can't quite define. It's not quite a cloud, but it's a little wisp of something that, So the point of departure for the idea is a physical thing in the sky that I think we all have some intuition about. And he says this realm of divine attributes is kind of like that. It's really difficult to put your finger on it. So that's this beautiful thumbnail sketch of the Seven Valleys, and it's followed by tablet 5, and this is a Persian tablet. We know the recipient, his name is Shams, but that doesn't tell us that much. There was, I think, more than one follower of Baha'u'llah named Shams.
Are these all, though, from the Baghdad era?
Yes, these are all Baghdad era, all pre-declaration. So between late 1850s, early 1860s. So this is also a lovely short tablet that I think we'll see. One can read in retrospect as alluding a little bit to Baha'u'llah's approaching declaration. We know during this time Baha'u'llah had this messianic secret that he had received in the Siyah-Chal that became alluded to with greater and greater frequency and more explicitly up until his private declaration in the Garden of Rezwan in 1863. And I think looking at this through the eye of hindsight, one can see him alluding to that. He says, "In the name of the peerless and ever-loving Lord, O Shams, hearken with all thy heart unto the nightingale song of the beloved, that perchance thou mayest abandon the habitation of self and desire and step into the placeless realm of eternal glory. Forsake thine own life and commune with him who is the life of thy life. Wert thou to traverse the limitless reaches of the spirit, thou wouldst of a certainty rend asunder the garment of patience and forbearance. Hasten to offer up thy soul, renounce the dross of this fleeting world, and find repose upon the throne of ancient glory. Each thing must needs have an effect, and each sign reveal a secret. Not until the world-illuming sun hath shone can the east be distinguished from the west, nor the blooming garden discerned from the barren waste. Heavenly strains compare not with earthly clamors, and the croaking of the raven can in no wise be confounded with the song of the nightingale. For the latter bespeaketh the land of the beloved, and increaseth life, whereas the former telleth only of the city of the blind, and causeth faith to wither. One must step forth and raise aloft the banner of earnest striving. By God, wert thou to hearken unto the heavenly words of this evanescent servant that have been raised in this mystic tablet, thou wouldst assuredly take to the desert of self-surrender. Turn aside from thine own heart and soul, and cast thy head at the feet of the friend. How high is the soaring flight of the phoenix of love, and how low the requisite measure of our yearning. Strive but a little to soar, that by the grace of him who is the eternal King, thou mayest ascend from the dust heap of utter non-existence unto the loftiest heights of ancient glory. Give wings to thy celestial spirit, and lend strength to thy mystic soul, that happily it may take flight in the atmosphere of divine nearness and attain the ultimate and invisible goal." This profitless world produceth naught save deadly poison, and its ephemeral dregs can never yield the everlasting cup. Were the Jesus of the Spirit to give ear to the call of holiness from the falcon of the realm above, he would assuredly cry out from his inmost being and be seized with fervid longing, even as the lover's soul. It is through that call that the Moses of eternity was dumbfounded. It is by its virtue that the Abraham of faithfulness shattered the idol of the mortal body. Shatter then, in turn, this idol, that thou mayest take up thine abode in the land of the beloved, and forsake all desire, that thou mayest take flight unto the Egypt of imperishable glory. Sanctify the city of thy heart, that thou mayest behold the beauty of the divine essence, and be quickened to a new life through the grace of the Holy Spirit. No melody remaineth that was not intoned upon this branch. No song remaineth that this nightingale hath not warbled. 1,000 Arabian ears are powerless to fathom this Persian lament. Nay, none but an embodiment of divine virtues can grasp this subtle mystery. Well is it then with the one who attaineth this ocean and drinketh therefrom the draught of life. The tablet, as I mentioned, is in Persian. So I think when he says 1,000 Arabian ears are powerless to fathom the Persian lament, maybe referring to the language that such a beautiful call to detachment, a call to the mystical basics.
The reference to the raven something in Persian culture or mythology or something? Because usually ravens are given, in a lot of other cultures, they see a lot. They see
That's
everything,
true.
They aren't blind.
Yeah, that's true. They're among the most intelligent of birds.
What is raven in Persian?
What's the word?
Kala.
Oh.
It-
Yeah.
Black, the dark kala, yeah?
I think it's not so much that.
Kala
Yeah, I think it's not so much that the intelligence of the bird is associated with the negative attribute of the raven is it's the croaking of it. So it's the contrast of the call of the raven to the call of the nightingale that gives and also the blackness of the raven and the whiteness of the dove.
in Native American, I know that they're supposed to be the rule keeper. The one, the rule keeper, the one that,
Also known as the trickster.
Yeah, the trickster.
yeah.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
crow, the raven has a wonderful family life. It's an exemplary bird
Oh,
in the behavior.
Yeah.
Its song is not pleasant.
yes.
No. There are multiple dimensions. Yeah, one can, if one looks at it from the perspective of its voice, then one can sort of put it up as a paragon of ugliness. But of course, if one looks at it from the perspective of its cleverness, they're the most amazingly clever birds. There's some YouTube videos of crows doing things which you just couldn't imagine. They recognize faces. They actually have fun. They actually play. I mean, there's videos of, there's a video on YouTube of a crow picking up like a sled, like a little piece of plastic or a lid or something like that, and flying up to the top of a snow-covered roof, and then sitting on this sled and sliding down, and picking up the lid and doing it over and over again. And someone caught this on video. It's like, is this what they do when they think they're not being recorded? You know, what else do the crows do when they do?
Someone was able to train a crow to go and pick up any shiny stuff and deliver it, and would get some.
Oh, it's a way to pick up
treats
spare
in
change.
return. So,
Yeah.
so this person was able to find a lot of, lost jewelry and
Sure.
stuff like that.
Or stolen jewelry,
Yeah.
plucked off of someone.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
They understand about human laws of ownership.
yeah.
They
So-
solve multi-step problems. They not only recognize faces, but can communicate it down generations
Yes.
who have never seen that face before. And they've been known to watch humans and learn processes like, a human leaves a plate in the park, and the raven goes and recycles it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Now-
we put it in recycling.
In this context, perhaps what Baha'u'llah is saying is we must not confound this intelligence or capacity with the hidden nightingales, spirituality. We tend to be attracted to it, like we are right this moment, to intelligence and to things that are kind of interesting.
Yeah,
and have capacity in that kind of worldly sense.
The sound of nightingale.
Yeah, it's it's not the intelligence of the bird that we're looking at.
Yeah.
No matter how intelligent a person might be, it doesn't make him a good singer. So it's the singing,
exactly, yes.
It's the singing quality that we're looking at. So
yeah. So let's move on, because we have a long tablet and I want to be able to cover this in the time remaining. This is the tablet number 6, and there's really a lot of meat in this tablet. Again, this one does not have, as most of the 20,000 tablets of Baha'u'llah, does not have a formal name, although it might be called the Tablet to the Lion-Hearted Soul. It begins with this snatch of poetry: O thou lion-hearted soul, even as a lion roar, that thy roaring may perchance to the 7th heaven soar. It is structured in miniature in the standard format of a theological treatise, which begins, which in the Islamic context always begins with a paragraph in praise of God, and usually precedes to praise of Muhammad and then a praise of the family of Muhammad, and then there's always a wa ba'd, wa amma ba'd, to continue, and then the formal start of it, and so we have that structure here, and because of limitations of time, I won't read the opening beautiful paragraph on the Transcendence of God, and his turning to the sort of address informal remarks to the recipient in the 3rd paragraph, but to move straight to paragraph 4. This is also where the tablet shifts. It begins in Arabic, and then the remainder of the tablet from paragraph 4 onwards is in Persian. And apparently Baha'u'llah's interlocutor was writing to him about the stages of divine unity and pure abstraction and oneness. And Baha'u'llah takes that as a point of departure to go back a step and to talk about let's say the shape of the spiritual journey in a very complementary way that we've seen Baha'u'llah discuss it in the 7 Valleys and Gems of Divine Mysteries. So let's hear how Baha'u'llah does it in this tablet. He says, to continue, thy letter, which was a repository of the pearls of celestial knowledge, was brought before this exile. God be praised, it rolled up the scrolls of separation and remoteness and spread out in their stead the realms of nearness and reunion. Methinks through the water of thy longing the fire of separation was changed into coolness and safety. In truth, a perfect meeting was attained through thy letter, and through thy mention of the stations of divine unity, this is Tawheed, and the signs of pure abstraction and oneness, it lifted from the world the veils of limitation. Actually, all of these words rhyme. Stations of divine unity is Tawheed, pure abstraction is Tajreed, oneness is Tafreed, and the veils of limitation are Tahdeed. So the whole thing really sings in the original Persian. And this notwithstanding that even the limitations of the world of existence are praised and cherished by the wayfarer. For he seeth all things in the mirror of the verse, no defect canst thou see in the creation of the God of mercy, and at every moment he heareth with his inner ear the tongue of the Holy Spirit uttering the words, seest thou a single flaw? In faithlessness he beholdeth the secret of fidelity, and in deadly poison he tasteth the sweetest honey. Even vengeance is embraced in this state. Nay more, the true lover welcometh the betrayal of the beloved. Thy faithfulness I cherish more than every gift that life can give. To suffer at thy vengeful hand, how much dearer than to live. So Baha'u'llah was asked about the stations of unity, and he says, yeah, this is great, but the stations preceding it also have their high points. There's something to be said about the stations preceding unity. And as we recall from the 7 Valleys, there are 3 stages of limitation: search, love, and knowledge, preceding the degrees of unity, which unity, contentment, wonderment, and true poverty and absolute nothingness. And so Baha'u'llah is sort of rolling it back and saying even these limitations of the world existence are praised and cherished by the wayfarer, because even seeing through the eye of separateness, even seeing through an eye that sees the differentiation of parts, even if that's a lower let's say, spiritual state than seeing things as all one. One can still see in an inspired way that each individual separate thing is a repository of a unique repository of the names and attributes of God, is a perfect manifestation of God's will in the world. Seest thou a single flaw? And even within this, within these realms of limitation, one can even embrace opposites. In faithlessness he beholdeth the secret of fidelity, and deadly poison he tasteth the sweetest honey. Recall in the Seven Valleys that we progress in the valley of love, knowledge, and unity from a point of, and before, from being, beginning at a point where you're not even aware of the oppositions, to being in a state of tension of opposites, which is like the valley of love, into the state of the resolution or the reconciliation of opposites, which was the valley of knowledge, and then moving into the next stage, which is the unity of opposites in the valley of unity. And we remember the story of the watchman, where the watchman in love, and that tension is ultimately resolved, becomes resolved if he can see the end in the beginning. If he saw that this seeming tyranny of the watchman was actually mercy itself, then Baha'u'llah makes the point that the tensions and opposites and the pain and suffering that we find in the world, ultimately, if we see the end in the beginning, then that's, one could call it a lower stage of unity. Understanding that opposites are reconciled, but it's not yet the valley of unity, because one hasn't unified them. One sees the end in the beginning, but the end and the beginning are still two different things. Whereas in the valleys of unity and forward, the end and the beginning become one.
So this one is really uncomfortable for me. The true lover welcometh the betrayal of the beloved.
Yes. So that's a really tough statement, isn't it?
Don't get it.
Yeah. Does anybody have any insights on that?
What is it?
The true lover. So he says, even vengeance is embraced in the state. Nay, more, the true lover welcometh the betrayal of the beloved.
Of the beloved.
Of the beloved.
Yeah, and in Buddhism they said that the greatest teacher is disillusion and disenchantment.
Really?
Yeah, and what it does is that it cracks open your fixed sense of reality.
Mm-hmm.
That reality is all possible. There's no positive, there's no negative. It's just a wide open field of conditions. And that we live in a highly conditional world. In the aspiritual flat plane world, it's highly conditional. So to transcend that, you have to experience the limitation of that flat world. And therefore
Of the what?
experience
The limitation of this flat world. Of this flat world.
Of this flat aspiritual world. And therefore you can rise above it.
Yeah, and to me, it's that you look at the Valley of Love, and as we said before, when we were doing the Valley of Love, it was like, okay, well, we're done. Like, that's as far as you go, and then there's more, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about that, going past the Valley of Love, and the idea that how could there possibly be anything past that, and then he went on to several other valleys. That, to me, is what this is. You have to get past the love.
It also, that statement really bothers me, but just thinking about it, the thing that I can take from it, and maybe this is a very simplistic view to take, but more the concept that love is unconditional.
Ever since the manifestation of Jesus, this has been played out. I mean, Christians often, of course, blame Judas, the evil Judas who betrayed Jesus. But Jesus gave him a kiss. And he loved Judas. It was not about that Judas was an evil force destroying anything. He was part of the process. Jesus saw the end in the beginning.
Yeah.
Also, the betrayal of the beloved could be seen as the kind of test that God sends his loved ones, and that on the face of it, it appears to be vengeance, but in reality is pure mercy. And actually, the same theme appears in the tablets, the long healing prayer, where it talks about the sort of the cloaked in the garment of affliction.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So these afflictions that come upon us, somebody might see it as God's vengeance on you, but it isn't.
Yeah.
It's His pure mercy.
Yeah.
So
I think Baha'u'llah is saying something similar in this next paragraph. He says, "Thus do the wayfarers in the wilderness of solitude and search experience events and conditions which, though to outward seeming be a mortal poison, are inwardly a wholesome draught, and though in appearance a passing mirage, are in reality pure and refreshing waters. Were I to attempt a full description of this station, neither could I express it, nor the hearer grasp it. And whoso observeth with the eye of innate knowledge will confess openly as well as privily the self-same truth." Another way of looking at this sort of strangeness and of the welcoming of the betrayal of the beloved would be that in later stages one realizes that it's actually an illusion to imagine that the beloved is different from the lover. I mean, when one reaches a higher degree of understanding, one understands that the lover and the beloved are one. And so this stage of being betrayed by the beloved may be a step towards the dissolution of that ultimately false dichotomy and the recognition of the ultimate oneness of the two.
It's easy to see that the tests of life are blessings and mercies. That's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
But for the lover, for God Himself to betray us, that does not sound like God.
That's hard. Yeah, that's harder. As long as we think of God as a being
All
out there,
merciful,
that's either
forgiving,
merciful or betraying to us. Yes, and that's all looking through the lens of God as a being separate from us. And later stages of the mystic journey, the two become melded into one. The reality of this. Yes, the reality of this, of the true reality of the seeker is the divine reflection.
Let me just ask: is there significance to the fact that this word "beloved" is not capitalized?
Perhaps so.
Not necessarily. I mean, because capitalization is always a choice of the translators, and a matter of interpretation of the translators, and so that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Although, in the opinion of the translators, this was more of a generic statement that didn't necessarily apply
It makes me think of
to God.
Untitled where Noah promises something 3 times, and God tells him to do this and never follows through with it.
Yeah, and that was one of the big tests, and Baha'u'llah refers to this in the Kitab-i-Gan as well. And there's a theological term for it, which is bada, which is basically translated crudely, it's when God changes His mind. And betrayal is a form of God changing His mind, I suppose. And
in some
that's,
ways, you
yeah.
can imagine afflictions sent from God as a betrayal, because a person who is going through affliction might feel like, oh, thou, why hast thou forsaken me? This feeling of forsakenness is a betrayal. You've left me. You've betrayed me. So it's very closely related
Yes.
to the person who's going through the affliction.
Yeah.
So
To me, that doesn't. Fine. I mean, I don't mind. I can go through affliction, and I don't feel betrayed. And I've never been betrayed. And so this is what's hard for me to see.
Let's let's forge on, because I think we're going to directly deal with this in the next 2 paragraphs.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You've passed the Pali. That's
Yeah.
There's one question I want to throw in there. That quatrain he has in there, is that quoting something?
Which one? The big.
Faithless I cheer every word.
Oh yeah. What was it? He's usually quoting from some mystic poet or other, and it's usually Rumi. Yeah, it's Rumi here. Yeah, it's 80% of the time it's going to be from the Masnavi of Rumi. So let's keep going, because I think Baha'u'llah is going to answer exactly the thing we're talking about. He says, as to perceived differences, these can be attributed to the diverse stations that have been attained by them that tread the path of search and mystic knowledge. Thus, at one time, the wayfarer beholdeth the lover hastening in search of the beloved through the wilderness of desolation. And at another he seeth the beloved yearning for the lover across the wilds of longing and devotion, or wandering aimless and bewildered the wastes of love in his pursuit. Oh, for a drop to drink, the thirsty soul doth groan. Oh, for a thirsty soul, the spring in turn doth moan. From yet another vantage, he perceiveth that the lover and the beloved are one and the same, and that the seeker is himself the very object of his search. How can the lover from the loved one ever part? So it is that at times the lovers of the celestial beauty sound the clarion of, say, all things are of God, while at others they raise the call of, it is from thyself. Some have related the aforementioned stages to the inner and outer journeys of the soul, which is the station of the knowledge of certitude, whilst others that have quaffed the wine of reunion regard each and every stage as relating to that knowledge, and consider the two stations of the eye of certitude and the truth of certitude as being exalted above and sanctified beyond these realms and all that pertaineth to them, even as hath been clearly affirmed by that mystic knower. Here Baha'u'llah is referring to, and I think as we've also mentioned in previous sessions, a very classical division of the spiritual journey into three stages by a famous a mystic. I think this was it al-Iraqi? I can't. I'm now blanking on the name. It's not important. But the idea being that there's three stages of certitude: the knowledge of certitude, the eye of certitude, and the truth of certitude, which roughly correspond to knowing about the flame, seeing the flame, and being burned by the flame, which we can all intuit are three whole completely different sort of ways of knowing about fire, and the later stages really can't be compared with the earlier stages. So Baha'u'llah is referring to this and saying some people have tried to map these three onto these valleys in a particular way, and Baha'u'llah just references it and doesn't himself say which one is right. He just says some have related it to this and some have done it this way. So we will also, as Baha'u'llah does, we'll just pass through to the next point, which is Baha'u'llah emphasizing the limitations that exist in these initial stages. Whether you see the lover and the lover pursuing the beloved, or the beloved pursuing the lover, or the lover and the beloved as one, he says, in all these stages, the mirror of the wayfarer's heart may bear the reflection of shadowy desires, wayward thoughts, and worldly attachments. Wherefore hath it been said that in these stations, at one time the hosts of reason are triumphant, and at another the armies of love prevail. At one time the clouds of affliction and sorrow conceal the heavens of gladness and joy. At another the eternal leviathan of love devoureth in one fleeting moment all manifestations of sadness, anguish, grief, and dejection. And the morn of divine guidance dawneth forth with the joyful tidings of despair not of God's mercy. And the gentle breezes of his providence dispel every vestige of torpor and estrangement. These tidings, however, are not constant and immutable in these stations, and the wayfarer remaineth confined between the right hand of faith and assurance and the left hand of denial and despair. I find this really interesting that he's pointing out the intrinsic limitations of the first three valleys. That as long as one is still looking with the eye of differentiation, that even if one sees the end and the beginning, even if one sees the lover and the beloved as one still is fundamentally in these stages differentiating one from the other. And Baha'u'llah says, you remain confined between the right hand of faith and assurance and the left hand of denial and despair in these valleys. Which also implies to me that in later stages, the whole dichotomy of faith and denial itself becomes transcended, which is an interesting thing to think about, because we think about that as a very firm and kind of immutable category. But there's stages in which denial becomes the difference between denial and faith become almost reversed in a way. Some wayfarers, he goes on in paragraph 9, remain forever veiled in these stages. Others, and now I think he's moving on to the valleys of unity, the first stage of unity and beyond. Others are assisted by invisible aid from the source of unfailing grace, whereat the hosts of the realm on high raise the tabernacle of divine power, and the ascendancy of, and verily our host shall conquer, is manifested. obliterating the signs and standards of every worldly attachment and limitation, even as alluded to by some who have attained this station. At such times, the ascendancy of God's names and attributes will so surround a soul as to leave it no place either to stay or to flee. This station, however, hath its own obscurities and impediments, for they that journey towards the land of divine unity and detachment, this is Tawheed, are still wrapped within the confines of names and attributes, and take delight in their gardens and bowers. Thus it is that in describing these stations, some have made reference to the unity of existence and the unity of appearance, which we talked about in previous sessions. By this is meant that the seeker will close his eyes to all save his beloved and open them to naught but his beauty. He will pass beyond the mortal world and approach the everlasting realm. He will see no beauty but the beloved's and hear no utterance but his praise. That is, he will avert his gaze from aught save his beauty and refuse to hearken to any melody but the sweet accents of his voice. Howbeit, some are led astray, even in this station. And I think this station is the first station of unity. For no sooner do they inhale the fragrance of reunion and hearken unto the voice of the doves of heavenly grace, than they imagine themselves to have attained perfection and wander lost in the wilderness of self-conceit, thus depriving themselves of the soft-flowing stream of divine providence and the ethereal cup of heavenly delight. We remember that Baha'u'llah refers to this danger in Gems of Divine Mysteries, where he says at the end of the journey, the seeker, if any self-conceit enters into his soul, he gets returned to the first stage without realizing it. So there's a danger of attainment, spiritual attainment to these later stages. And Baha'u'llah says there's a danger of attaining the station of unity where one is now seeing, okay, all things are one. And the danger is the danger of self-conceit, that one thinks of now, oh, well, I'm one with God. God is, the lover and the beloved are one, so I'm God now. One can imagine very crudely that that's kind of the fundamental self-conceit that can, and that's the misunderstanding that can attend just one's first entrance into the Valley of Unity. There are degrees of unity beyond that, as Baha'u'llah refers to, again, in reference to this unity of existence and unity of appearance at the bottom of page 78. Baha'u'llah refers to these in the Seven Valleys, paragraph 84. This is on page 49, where he says, in this valley, and this is the valley of, this is the final valley of true poverty and absolute nothingness. In the Seven Valleys, Baha'u'llah says, in this valley the wayfarer passeth beyond the stages of the unity of existence and the unity of appearance, and reacheth a unity that is sanctified above both of these stations. And we've talked about this, I think, more than once, that this makes clear that there are different degrees of unity, and there are earlier degrees and later degrees. And the earlier degrees are associated with these Sufi concepts of vatat wujud and vatat shuhud, the unity of existence and the unity of appearance. And Baha'u'llah says these are, in the end, more limited conceptions of unity, and that there's a still higher degree of unity. What is that still higher degree of unity? It has something to do with detachment from the realm of names and attributes, passing beyond names and attributes themselves. I think Baha'u'llah refers to this in the Tablet of Visitation to Abdul Baha, where he says that there's a beautiful phrase about being detached from all things within thy holy precincts. At one point in that prayer, there's an idea that at some point even the divine names and attributes, the ones that we venerate as our only signposts to the divine in the world, at some point even those become a barrier. And just like the good deeds of the righteous are the sins of the near ones, the good deeds of the righteous is understanding and venerating these names and attributes, but they're the sins of the near ones, because the near ones realize that even the names and attributes are veils. And this is, I think, where Baha'u'llah comes to the last stage, which is where one is beyond names and attributes, and that's what we described that in last session's tablet, and connected it to the last valley of the Gems of Divine Mysteries, which is beyond fana, beyond baha'i, beyond eternal life and self-annihilation, is this valley that has no name or mention, that is beyond names and attributes. So I think we can map this last stage, which is paragraph 10, onto that final stage of the mystic journey, which for Baha'u'llah is the dissolving of all things. Not just oneness, it's beyond just seeing everything as one. I suppose it maps onto the two concepts in Arabic. There's two words, and I think we've referred to this in previous sessions as well. There's vahidiyya and there's ahadiyya. There's oneness, or rather there's unity and there's oneness. There's unity, which is the coming together of things to form a single entity. There's human unity, which is the unity of a lot of different individual human beings, and they come together to form one whole. But there's something beyond that, which is oneness, which is the oneness of the number one, which has no inner articulations. It is just a whole, and there's no way, you cannot divide it into parts. And there are two words in Arabic which are very theologically, philosophically charged, which are vahidiyya and ahadiyya, which are these two degrees of unity. The lower degree of unity is the unity with our inner articulations, and then the higher degree of unity is the unity that has no inner articulations. To talk about or think about the divine reality or God at that level is to think about God beyond names and attributes, because the inner articulations are the names and attributes. So this is, I think, the stage that Baha'u'llah describes in paragraph 10. He says, "Yet others, assisted by the grace of the everlasting friend, consume these veils with the fire of his love and step into the meads of ancient glory. That is, forsaking the wilderness of the unity of existence, they attain unto the ultimate abode of the true appearance of the divine unity." Here we have a phrase, Tawhid-e Shuhudi, which I'm not sure if there's a history of this phrase in the Sufi literature. So clearly will they witness this in this stage, God's all-encompassing mercy, that in every created thing, both in the world and in the souls of men, they will behold him who hath been interpreted as the holy outpouring. There's a lot to unpack from that. No longer will they close their eyes to any beauty, nor stop their ears from hearkening to any voice, for there is no prohibition in this stage, and no debarment, inasmuch as in all things they will discern with both their outer and inner eyes the revelation of the signs of him who is the King of all names and attributes. And in every atom they will find a door that leadeth to the garden of divine unity and the city of pure abstraction. Wherever I turn my gaze, 'tis thee whom I behold. So entirely will the hearts of the wayfarers be transported by longing for the ecstasies of this station, that they will come to conceive no stage apart from this stage, to see themselves as abiding within the court of the Beloved and circling round his sanctuary, and to consider it as the ultimate abode of them that search and the uttermost station of such as have attained. And just to finish it off, a myriad names and attributes have been ascribed to these degrees and stations, which I am disinclined to mention here. It is indeed solely because of thy longing and devotion that I have engaged in such ephemeral and limited topics. And this, notwithstanding that speech is the greatest evidence of the worth of the speaker, and guideth unto the recognition of the source of guidance. For no more complete and enduring proof hath been or will be vouchsafed unto man from the empyrean of everlasting glory than words and utterance. This verily is a self-evident truth for the braying of the themselves, although I think it's implied in paragraph 9 where he says where he says that they that journey towards the land of divine unity and detachment are still wrapped within the confines of names and attributes and take delight in their gardens of bowers. And so I think that implies that the next stage involves a freedom from an abstraction from names and attributes. But to come back to this holy outpouring, this provides a lovely point of connection with the Kitab-i-Igan, where one of the themes of the Kitab-i-Igan, in part 2 of the Kitab-i-Igan, is Baha'u'llah talks about the 3 degrees of the 3 degrees of divine revelation. And there's the most holy outpouring and the holy outpouring and the universal revelation. It's a very technical discussion that is connected to, it has a background also in Sufi literature. And it's 3 ways of thinking about how the divine mercy is manifested, or in 3 different ways in which it exists. And the overall context is Baha'u'llah is describing what is meant by attainment to the divine presence, because certain literal readers of the Quran would say, well, attainment to the divine presence has been promised, it hasn't been attained, and so this is the question of the uncle of the Bab that gave rise to the Kitab-i-Gan, and so therefore the Bab can't be who he said he was. And Baha'u'llah interprets the meaning of attainment to the divine presence in these three different degrees. And the first degree is the most holy outpouring, which Baha'u'llah says it's the feiz-e aqdas. It is the revelation of God to his own essence. It's the fourth degree of love from Paris Talks, the love of God for his own essence, which is a form of divine revelation, but it's divine self-revelation, which is not manifest in the world and is a pure abstraction from our perspective. The second one that Baha'u'llah describes is the lowest one, which is the universal revelation, that divine revelation which is visible within every atom. And Baha'u'llah says that is attained at every moment of every day. And that neither of those two are what the Quran refers to by attainment to the divine presence. That leaves the third, which is the middle tier, also the middle tier of the ringstone symbol, which is the feiz-e muqaddas, or the holy outpouring here in paragraph 10 of this tablet, which Baha'u'llah associates with the prophet or the manifestation. So it's a very long-winded way of saying Baha'u'llah is bringing it back, sort of at the end of the spiritual journey, he's bringing it back to seeing within every created thing this holy outpouring, this feiz-e muqaddas, which is ultimately a sign of the reality of the manifestation, which is shining within everything.
It's sort of as if the farther you go, you get to mystery, and you can't understand it.
Yes.
That's the farthest we can get.
Yeah.
Is that we don't know.
Yeah, and every mountain you climb, just like for those who have climbed mountains, and you reach what looks like the top, and you get to the top and you realize that there's another peak behind it, and because the highest peak is always obscured from you, because of the angle of approach to the peak, and so you often have these false moments where you think you've reached the top, and then you crest this minor peak, and you realize that there's still peaks beyond. The spiritual journey, I think, is a little bit like that. You think you reach the top, and you realize there's always a higher peak beyond.
Mount St. Helen had a thing called False Peak.
Yeah. So anyway, these tablets, I think, are such a valuable addition to what we previously had, which was just the 7 valleys and the 4 valleys, and they give us so much, just different angles of approach to ultimately what is the same topic. And I think we could almost map it out, and having read through these, and we'll have one more go at it with the 4 valleys in our next session, and we may sort of manage to do the whole thing in one session. We'll see. But I think collectively they give us a 3-dimensional picture of spiritual journey that for sure I think will shake us loose from any tendency we may have to think of it as some kind of crystallized fixed thing. But it's a very fluid thing. It's described differently to different people, although it's not, it's just not randomly described to different people. There is a coherence behind it, and the coherence has to do with how the stages that the seeker goes through in terms of to what degree they see the unity of things. And, there's lower degrees in which one sees distinctions, higher degrees in which one understands that things are unified, but still there's still higher degrees of unity in which names and attributes themselves dissolve. So that's probably enough for one day.
In this kind of more open, fluid way, so that we avoid the traps of name and attributes.
This idea of the name and attributes being a trap is definitely a warning that's issued here and elsewhere. And how does one avoid being trapped by that? Because from one perspective, the names and attributes are great goals to attain, to embody them in one's own life and actions. They are divine. They are, but depending on what side of them you're looking at, you're either looking up to them as a goal to strive for, or you're looking behind as, oh, these are part of the veils of the world that one ultimately wants to transcend. And
it has to be looked at as a phase of growth and development, you know. So if you haven't developed and acquired the station, some of these names and attributes, which we're all meant to, then that's something that we have to strive towards. But for a person that has surpassed all these, then they might be looking back. Whereas for the rest of us, we're still looking up.
Yeah.
They're a peak, but not the peak.
Also our definition and understanding of what those names and attributes mean, and if that's what we're trying to attain to, we're only attaining to our own limited awareness of what it means.
Yeah.
And when you let go of that, perhaps you can move beyond.
Yeah. And again, there's a personal component to this. One wants to achieve the highest degree of knowledge and understanding personally and have one's own personal mystical journey. But there's also a social component to this. And as we keep returning to the fact that different people are just going to be in different states. And some people, Baha'u'llah says, are forever trapped in earlier stages of the journey. And indeed, many people remain in the plains of heedlessness. They're not even in the valleys. They're not even in the valley of search. And that's, as Baha'u'llah assures us in the last tablet that we read in the last session, this is a feature and not a bug. This is the nature of the human condition. And that's not going to be changed. So what we need to do then, and the challenge of the day, the practical challenge of the Baha'i community in the world is, how do we forge living, breathing communities that fully embrace this diversity, this fundamental diversity of spiritual approach and perspective? Because we're not going to make everyone believe the same thing. It's not going to happen.
This may be